Hello, today is May 7th, 2001, and my name is Andrew Slater. I'm a risk management analyst for San Joaquin County Human Resources, and the training we are going to do today is heat illness prevention for the general employee. Please note at the time of this recording, there has not been any new laws or regulations implemented by Cal OSHA in regards to heat illness prevention. Please take in consideration social distancing practices in conjunction with COVID-19 procedures outlined by the CDC, Cal OSHA, and local public health services. This will be important when it comes to breaks, water, and other provisions that may require sanitization and social distancing. This training is applicable to volunteers, alternate work program individuals, AWPs, part-time and full-time employees. There are going to be three main components that we're going to discuss today throughout this heat illness prevention training that can help mitigate any heat-related illnesses. And those three are water, rest, and shade. And remember, when it comes to water, that's 1 cup of water every 15 minutes, 1 quart per hour. And if you're using igloo-type disposable cups, remember, 8 cones equal about 4 cups of water. Please note, if utilizing a vehicle for shade and rest, that vehicle must have operating air conditioning. So inspect your vehicles, make sure your AC is working properly, and submit those work orders to correct any vehicles that do not have working AC. Our learning objectives today, we're going to be discussing the impacts of the regulation, which is California Code of Regulation 3395. We'll be discussing environmental factors and personal factors, how what we're doing or what we're working around can compound our exposure to heat and heat illnesses. How the body reacts to heat, from being sweaty to developing heat cramps, moving to more serious things like heat illnesses, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. We'll talk about the importance of first aid measures, the importance of acclimatization, understanding the importance of consuming water, recognizing life-threatening situations, and knowing our personal responsibilities. What I like to say, being your brother's keeper, being your sister's keeper. We want to make sure everybody goes home safe at the end of the day. So first, let's start off with talking about the importance of the impact of this regulation. Again, this is through Cal OSHA. Here in California, we follow a state-specific plan, and that's in regards to the General Industry Safety Orders, Title 8, California Code of Regulation 3395. When this regulation was initially implemented, it was geared towards outdoor workers. But through experience, Cal OSHA determined there was other job classifications within California that had this exposure. And what it mandates is water, rest, shade, and emergency medical procedures. Let's start off with talking about environmental factors. What things compound our exposure to heat? So air temperature and relative humidity. Anyone who's been down south in southern states, maybe down in Mississippi or Florida, knows the difference between when it's 90-degree weather's out and 80% humidity. Fortunately for us here in California, in the San Joaquin Valley, we have relatively low humidity. But artificial humidity can be created through things like laundromats, boiler rooms, and other work-related environments. Radiant heat. Are we standing on a hot surface that has direct exposure to the sun? That's going to be a lot different than working in the shade. Conductive heat sources. Am I working around a hot engine? Air movement or lack of air movement. Am I working in a confined space, an area that restricts air movement? Physical activity and duration. There's a big difference if I'm using a shovel or swinging an axe versus if I'm taking notes on a clipboard. My physical activity is going to aspirate my exposure to the heat. But there's some things you could do to help protect yourself. So let's start off with that PPE, personal protective equipment, and talk about clothing and safety gear that we can wear. First off, follow your department's dress code policy. Long sleeve clothing can help protect you against dangerous UV rays and your exposure to the sun. Remember, exposure to the sun is a cumulative injury. It happens over many years. By protecting our skin, we can help mitigate that. Next, let's talk about sunglasses. So often we're tempted to go out and work out in the sun and maybe wear our Ray-Bans or our Oakley sunglasses. And we're protecting our eyes from the sun, but we may naturally have an impact hazard that requires us to wear safety glasses. So remember, follow your department's hazard assessments, and if the job task you're doing requires you to wear safety glasses, make sure you're wearing safety glasses that are tinted, that are the Z87 standard. We wouldn't want to mitigate a hazard and create one by wearing sunglasses to protect us against UV rays, and then now we have an eye exposure. You can be proactive by applying sunscreen or grab a cooling tie. These cooling ties can be found at local stores. You soak them in water for 15 minutes. They swell out to about the size of a garden hose. You drape them over the back of your neck, and it can cool your body temperature down by 10 to 15 degrees. We also see there we have a helmet, a hard hat with a curtain over the back of it. Again, the hard hat may be a requirement for a hazard assessment to protect your head, but we could add that curtain on to protect the back of your neck. And then also include a wide brim hat. If all else fails, pack yourself a popsicle for lunch to help you cool yourself down. So here's some images of conductive heat sources or radiant heat surfaces that you may be exposed to. That top left corner is an image of a boiler. Next to it, we have an employee who's paving asphalt. Again, a conductive heat source that's going to increase the exposure to heat-related illness. Maybe physical activity. Maybe you have repetitive motion of digging and digging a hole or doing a physical activity. That's going to raise your heart rate and cause you to become more dehydrated the longer you are out in high temperatures. Or if you're in our last picture there of a cool down station and someone who's in a vehicle, but they have the ability to get out and cool down and have that water, have that rest, have that shade. Let's discuss personal factors, things that are inherent about our bodies, our age, that can impact our exposure to heat-related illnesses. First off, let's start with age. As we get older, and our health naturally deteriorates, and we experience heat differently. So make sure you have that discussion with your personal physician, maintain a healthy BMI, maintain a healthy weight. That way you can work in high heat conditions and not aspirate any type of pre-existing conditions. And please note, if you're giving medication that may impact your ability to work in hot weather, have that conversation with your supervisor. And you may say, how can I know that this medication I'm taking can impact my ability to work in high heat? Have that discussion with your pharmacist, your doctor. Read the side of the warning label on the pill bottle, and if it says do not take this medication while working in high heat, have that discussion with your doctor, your pharmacist, or your supervisor. Now remember, HIPAA laws protect you from stating why you're taking the medication, but if you're on any type of medication that can impact your ability to work in high heat or impact your ability to operate equipment or machinery of vehicles, our policies here in the county state that you must have that conversation with your supervisor. Again, we wouldn't want to create a hazardous situation. Personal acclimatization to environmental conditions, we'll be talking about that a little bit later, but it takes 4 to 14 days to get acclimated. Water consumption. It's always important to consume plenty of water prior to the high heat event taking place, rather than drinking the water on the hot day, so that way you're properly well hydrated. And make sure you take that into consideration with alcohol and caffeine consumption. Let's say an individual had to report to work Monday at 5 o'clock in the morning, and Friday rolls around after work before that Monday, and that employee goes out and indulges with friends and family members and consumes alcohol. Wakes up the next morning, maybe dehydrated, hungover, consumes coffee and energy drinks, and then goes out that Sunday night to drink again. Come Monday morning, is that employee going to be adequately hydrated? The answer is no. So know if you have a high heat event taking place following your work shift, to plan accordingly. Drink water, stay hydrated, avoid alcohol, drink responsibly, avoid diuretics, caffeine, anything that can help that would increase dehydration factors. So let's talk about how the body reacts to heat. This is something that we've all experienced. Naturally, we become thirsty. We have cooling mechanisms where we start getting sweaty. Maybe our blood pressure increases, and our core electrolytes change. On that notes of electrolytes, so often people ask me, Andy, should we be drinking sport drinks every day like Gatorade or Powerade? And isn't that better to do that rather than drink water? And my answer to that is no. If you properly stay hydrated with water, there's no need for Gatorade. Let's reserve Gatorade and sports drinks and those electrolyte replacement drinks for the event of a heat illness. And those heat illnesses we're going to talk about next are heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Now, if I had to ask you which one of those are more severe, Your answer should be heat stroke. Now, if someone is experiencing a heat-related illness, do we ever want to douse their body with ice cold water? No, never do this. This can cause shock or may cause shock for the individual. Definitely not recommended. First, let's talk about heat exhaustion. Again, something that a lot of us may have experienced through sports or recreation. It involves heavy sweating, dizziness, clamminess, muscle cramps, elevated body temperatures. If someone's experiencing a heat-related illness, especially heat exhaustion, there's something you could do that can lower their body temperatures when prompted with immediate first aid. And that involves applying cool ice packs to key body parts. And those body parts are behind the neck, the armpits, behind the knees, and the groin. If you target these key areas with cold compresses, you can drive down the person's body temperature rapidly. So if someone was to collapse and pass out, we want to move their body off a hot surface, out of that sun, into some shade. We want to get their feet elevated and apply those cool compresses. This recalls a personal event of mine that I experienced over a couple of years ago, where I was at an event where a woman was passing out appetizers at this event. The woman was wearing high heels, standing in direct sunlight, and she was in her 50s or 60s when I heard a loud thump, and the woman had fallen, hit her head on a brick paver, and she had what I had seen or witnessed, a heat-related illness. It was very hot that day. It must have been 105 degrees. I rendered first aid. I came over to her. I told people immediately, you call 911. You get me some cold wash rags. You get me that wine box over there and let's elevate her feet. You bring that umbrella over here. And why it's so important to direct people and say you and point is because there's something called the bystander effect. So often it happens during emergencies. It's when it happens when you're driving down Highway 99 and you see that car on fire on the side of the road, and rather than pulling over and help, you assume someone else is going to do it. But guess what? The 200 people ahead of you and the 500 people after you are thinking the exact same thing, and no one renders assistance. So you have to take charge. You have to take leadership in these moments. In that situation, I was happy to say the first responders were able to come on site, render first aid, and that lady was okay that day. But just take note of sensitive areas. Again, applying cool compresses. I had my wife assist with that day with applying the cool compresses to the groin area. So, and remember, if anyone ever loses consciousness, 911 needs to be called. We need medical professionals to assess the situation to deem that they're ready to return back to work. Imagine if an employee passes out for briefly maybe 30 seconds and says, oh, I'm okay, and then they hop back in an excavator or a bulldozer and they get back to work. Do we want that person operating that machinery unless they've been medically cleared to return to work? Of course, we want them medically cleared. So here's a real-life situation of ice pack placement and cooling devices. This looks like a real-world situation where this individual looks like a marathon runner, where they took a beach towel and soaked it in water and draped it over him, covering his neck, his armpits, his groins, behind the neck, and cools the body temperature down very quickly. So let's look at what happens when we go from heat exhaustion to heat stroke, that dangerous transition. A lot of the symptoms are very similar. However, there are going to be some key differences, and that means the body temperature has now risen above 103 degrees. Cal OSHA did a very interesting demonstration for us where they took a cantaloupe and they threw it into a boiling pot of water. That boiling pot of water was to represent your body, and that cantaloupe was to represent your brain. What do you think happened to that cantaloupe when it was thrown in that water? It shrunk up. So that's a representation of your organs and what happens with your body. So remember, when we're transitioning to that heat stroke realm, individuals may lose consciousness. They're going to become nauseated, vomiting, things that are going to increase their exposure to a heat-related illness. I always found the statistic very interesting that heat is the number one weather-related killer. So statistics don't lie. What we can do by giving prompt first aid training, we can help mitigate this. But remember, if someone's experiencing heat-related illness, follow those first aid procedures and get medical professionals to evaluate as soon as possible. So for heat stroke, we have some pictures here that depict what a heat stroke may look like. someone who can't physically hold themselves up anymore, someone who's collapsed. Maybe someone who's an extrovert becomes an introvert. That person who's very, very talkative all of a sudden hasn't talked once today. Why? What's up with Andy? Andy always talks all day long. Why is he not talking anymore? Or there's Jeff. Jeff, who's a recluse and doesn't talk to anybody, and now Jeff won't shut up and he's rambling on and on and on. These are concerning. They're personality traits that have become different. So the people that you work around, their personality traits. If you know if someone's acting differently while working in high heat, it could be a sign of a heat stroke. So again, remember, if someone loses consciousness, call 911. And heat cramps, that's going to be one of the last heat-related illnesses that we've all probably experienced. Again, with proper hydration levels and keeping those potassium levels high by consuming foods rich in potassium like bananas, you could help mitigate the heat cramps. Acclimatization. Acclimatization means how we get used to the weather within our 4 to 14 days. So at the time of this recording, the average temperature is about 80, 85 degrees outside, and people are already complaining, wow, it's so hot outside. And I always make note when I hear that, because I think, wow, come July and August when it's 110 degrees, we will really be wishing for these 80, 85 degree days. So in your first 4 to 14 days, we want to monitor the new employees, AWPs, our part-time employees, our volunteers, people who haven't been out in the workforce who aren't necessarily acclimated. And again, during this time frame, let's drink that water, get plenty of rest, water, and shade. Consumption of water. So consumption of water must be fresh, pure, suitably cool, drinking costs at no cost to the employee. Remember, these rules and regulations were constructed for bad employees to address their employees, to make sure that their employees had a safe work environment. Imagine if you were working at a construction site and your supervisor told you to drink out of that irrigation canal or that sprinkler head. That wouldn't be pure, suitably cool drinking water. Or if your employer made you purchase water, again, it must be provided free. So this igloo cooler is a great representation. It's clean. It's cool. It's been provided with water. Remember, when we're talking cool, we don't talk about ice cold water. We're just talking about a temperature difference between the outside air and the temperature of that water. Again, we wouldn't want to give employees hot water in a tin container that's been sitting out in the sun all day. That would be a violation of the standard. So drink 4 cups of water per hour, and 4 cups equals 8 of those igloo container cones. Remember, 4 cups equals 8 of those cones. Access to water. So potable drinking water must be provided at no cost to the employee. So imagine a situation, let's say you worked in a vineyard, right? And the water was on row 1 and you're on row 50, but the water could easily move along with you. So you should try to make an effort, your department should make that effort to move that water around with you. Again, here in the county, that's not an issue. Again, think about that person who's out there working in a vineyard and they're on row 50 and the water's on row 1. They would have a hard time walking in order to get access to drink that water. Again, here's another image I got off the internet of a dirty 55-gallon drum. Who knows what that was used for? Stagnant water left out in the air. Not something that I or you would want to drink out of. Here's some more images of some just dirty igloo containers. So corrosion, dirtiness, unkept, something that we don't want anybody to be drinking out of. So shade up. So shade must be erected or provided for the employees at 80 degrees. That's the indicator temperature. So make sure that you have access to shade within a vehicle. If the vehicle has operating AC, then that does count as a shade structure. We want to follow your department's emergency contact procedures, and this can be found within your department's emergency action plan, which is usually as an appendix to your department's injury illness prevention plan, or IIPP. So in your department's emergency action plan, it will have procedures and policies on how to enact emergency response services, how to call 911. For instance, whether you work in a building where you have to dial 9 to get out, or you have to dial 911, or 911. Those are all important factors. So make sure you follow your standard operating procedures that are outlined within your emergency action plan. And those can talk about rescue areas. Imagine you worked at the North County landfill and someone had a heat-related illness out in the middle of the landfill. How are you going to communicate to the first responders to give first aid? Where are you going to take the employee? Who's going to meet them out there? Who's going to allow them in within the facility? All that should be outlined within your emergency action plan. So there are three main components that we talked about today, and those are what? You should be thinking about water, rest, and shade. Remember, water, that's 1 cup every 15 minutes, 1 quart per hour. And if you're using those Igloo with the disposable cups, remember 8 cones equal about 4 cups of water. And rest and shade. So in summary, we talked about the factors leading up to heat-related illnesses. We talked about heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and then heat cramps. We talked about heat-related procedures on how to mitigate that. Remember that water, rest, and shade. Follow your department's emergency procedures. Review your department's heat illness prevention plan, your injury illness prevention plan. If you have more questions, you could always reach out to your department safety and health representative, who is your liaison between risk management and your department. And remember, the number one thing that you could do to help mitigate heat-related illness is drink plenty of water. It's our goal that all of you make it home safe at the end of the day. If you have any questions, please reach out to the County Safety Officer, Lolita Pearson, or myself, Andy Slater, and we'll be happy to help you. Thank you and have a safe day.